Let us turn back time to a scorching autumn afternoon in the year 401 BC. We are north of Babylon, on the banks of the Zab River, a tributary of the mighty Tigris. Here, amidst the dust and the heat, a massive army has made camp. 10,000 soldiers. They are thousands of miles from home. Their king is dead. Their pay is gone, and they are surrounded by the Persian Empire. But right now, there is no battle. There is only waiting. The heavy, suffocating weight of the desert. In the center of the camp, there is movement. The Greek generals have donned their finest armor. Their leader, Clearchus, mounts his horse. They are riding to the Persian commander's tent for a peace treaty. The soldiers watch them go. Perhaps, they whisper, perhaps they will let us go home safely. The small group of leaders rides away from the safety of the camp, shrinking into the horizon. The sun is high. Heat waves distort the air. Everything looks like a mirage. Hours pass. The soldiers in the camp clean their shields, eat their rations, and play dice. Then, they see a single man running from the horizon. He has no horse. His armor is torn. It is Nicarchus, one of the captains. He is holding a deep wound in his side. He does not scream. He only runs. When he reaches the camp, he collapses in the dust, and he whispers the terrible truth. They are all dead. The generals were arrested. The captains were slaughtered. The peace was a lie. In that moment, a silence fell over the camp of 10,000. No shouting, no weeping, just the cold shock of realization. They were leaderless. They had no map. They were in the heart of enemy territory, surrounded by rivers and armies. The sun began to set. The famous, swift twilight of the desert painted the sky in blood red. That night, no one lit a fire. No one ate. They had hunger, but no appetite. Everyone curled up next to their weapons. But sleep was impossible. Every sound sounded like an attack. From the distance, from the Persian camp, came the sounds of victory drums and songs. The wind carried these sounds like arrows into the hearts of the Greeks. One soldier, Xenophon, leaned his back against a tree. He looked up at the sky. The stars were the same as the stars in Athens. But this was not Athens. This was a grave. Imagine, 10,000 men, all feeling the exact same fear at the same moment. Will we die tomorrow? Towards midnight, exhaustion overcame fear. Eyes closed, Xenophon drifted off. He had a dream. In his dream, a lightning bolt struck his father's house. The house was in flames. Was it a warning? Or a sign? Was the light of Zeus burning the house, or illuminating the darkness? Xenophon woke up in a cold sweat. He sat in the dark, and he decided. To wait was death. To move was life. If the generals were dead, new generals must be chosen. He stood up. He went to wake the other officers. Before dawn broke, he would unite this hopeless army. The remaining captains gathered in the dark. Their faces held the shadows of sleeplessness and grief. Everyone waited for someone to speak. Xenophon broke the silence. He had put on his finest armor. If we are to die, he told himself, I should be dressed for it. If we are to win, I will need this armor. His voice trembled, but his eyes were steady. He gave them not a plan, but a purpose. We are not sheep for the slaughter, he said. We are conquerors. When dawn broke, 10,000 soldiers gathered in the square. The sun made their fear visible. Everyone looked at each other, asking, what now? Xenophon stood on a mound of earth. The Persians broke the treaty, he shouted. This is good. For now, the gods are on our side, not theirs. But to march, they had to be light. Their wagons were full of loot. Carpets, silver cups, silk clothes. They were all chains. And in that moment, the greatest order of surrender in history was given. Burn it, Xenophon said. Burn everything that slows you down. The first torch was thrown. Drywood caught fire instantly. Years of accumulation, spoils of war, luxuries, all surrendered to the tongue of the fire. The soldiers watched the flames. Strangely, no one was sad. As their possessions burned, the fear in their souls turned to ash and flew away. They were becoming free. Smoke rose to the sky in black pillars. This smoke was a message to the Persians. We have nothing left to lose. Now the army was ready. They formed a hollow square. Heavy infantry on the outside, baggage animals, and the wounded on the inside. A walking fortress. North, said the guides. Follow the Tigris. And the first step was taken. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of 10,000 sandals shook the desert. They crossed the Zab River. The water was cold, the current strong. But holding onto each other, they reached the other side without falling. Xenophon looked back. Their old camp was now just gray smoke rising on the horizon. The past had burned. Ahead of them lay the unknown. And on the horizon, a purple line faintly visible. The mountains. And so the great march began. 10,000 men moved in a massive, empty square formation. They were like a city on the move. From the outside, they looked invincible. But their enemies were no longer armies attacking from the front. The enemy was the desert itself. Endless dust, the scorching sun, and the never-ending, hypnotic rhythm of the sandals. Rap, rap, rap. Around midday, the monotony of the march was broken. The soldiers at the back began to look back restlessly over their shoulders. There was movement on the horizon. These were Persian light cavalry. They rode horses as swift as the wind. They approached, drew their bows, unleashed a deadly rain of arrows, and then retreated. For the Greeks, this was a new hell. They couldn't even see the enemy. They could only hear the sound of arrows hitting their shields. Tap, tap, tap. It was like an attack by invisible bees. The heavily armored Greek hoplites desperately tried to attack. But with their 30-kilogram bronze armor, they were like turtles chasing the wind. It was impossible to catch up. Xenophon watched his men fall helplessly to the ground. At that moment, he realized a painful truth. Being the world's best heavy infantry was useless here. The rules of war had changed. When they set up camp that evening, morale had plummeted. The groans of the wounded echoed through the night. Their shields had been no protection. Their spears had failed to reach the enemy. The soldiers sitting around the fire were silent. The weight of their despair was heavier than their bronze armor. If this continued, they would all be hunted down one by one before reaching the mountains. But an idea sprouted in Xenophon's mind. That night he gathered his captains. He held not a weapon, but a simple, smooth river stone. The next morning, instead of marching, the army embarked on a strange undertaking. Soldiers spread out across the parched riverbeds and began filling their pockets with round stones. Others were weaving slingshots from wool and leather. Soldiers from the island of Rhodes, in particular, were skilled at this. In their hands, a stone could become a deadly projectile. In one corner of the camp, slingshot drills began. That whistling sound of stones hitting the ground. Whiz. This sound was the Greeks' new hope. At the same time, the clumsy horses used for carrying loads were gathered. A makeshift cavalry unit of 50 men was formed. Unsaddled, inexperienced, but brave. This wasn't the image of a professional army. It was a desperate adaptation. But it was their only chance for survival. When the march resumed the next day, Persian cavalry appeared on the horizon. They expected an easy prey, just like the day before. They approached confidently. But this time, stones, not arrows, rained down from the Greek ranks. The bullets fired by the Rhodian slingers reached further than the Persian arrows. For the first time, the Persian horses panicked. Amidst the chaos created by the stones, the Persians were bewildered by what was happening. And at that very moment, Xenophon's small, makeshift cavalry unit burst forth from within the square. They were few in number, but their surprise effect was enough. The Persian archers scattered. That day, the Greeks not only won a battle, but also regained their self-confidence. When the dust settled, the army continued its march. They still had thousands of kilometers to go, but they were no longer helpless. They were learning the rules of the desert. The safety of the plains was over. On the horizon, those colossal walls that tore through the sky appeared, the Karduk Mountains. Wild and lawless lands that even the Persians feared to enter. As the army entered the narrow passes, the world went dark. The sun disappeared behind the steep slopes. Now there were only gray stone walls to the right and left. Claustrophobia gripped the soldiers. Above, on the peaks where even eagles struggled to fly, shadows flickered. These were the Karduks, the lords of these mountains. They disliked outsiders and had never bowed, not even to the Persian king. The attack didn't begin with a war cry. It began with a deep, resounding roar. Boom, boom. And then tons of rocks began rolling down the slopes. The Greeks raised their shields above their heads. But what could bronze do against the power of nature? The rocks pierced through the ranks, crushing man and metal. This was not a battle, but an execution. Then it started to rain. The dry heat of the desert gave way to a bone-chilling, wet cold. The ground turned to mud. Every step was a struggle. That night, they spent the night on the wet rocks, without fire or food. In the darkness, they could hear the whistling of enemy arrows. The mountains spoke to them, and their language was death. Xenophon was desperate. If they remained in the valley, they would all perish. The only option was to climb higher than the enemy. A captured guide pointed them to a secret goat path. A unit of volunteers was selected. At night, under the storm, they climbed the steep cliffs. Their hands were covered in blood, their breaths gasping for air. They were climbing towards the sky, towards the enemy's head. At dawn, a signal came from the summit. The Greeks had captured the hill. The Carduchians in the valley were no longer hunters, but hunted. They fled. The army crossed the pass safely. The valley below was shrouded in fog. For a moment, silence prevailed. They had succeeded. But as they reached the mountain peaks, the Armenian highlands, the tone of the wind changed. It sharpened, and something white and cold began to drift through the air. A soldier reached out his hand. What fell into his palm was a snowflake. For the children of the desert, this was a more terrifying sign than an enemy arrow. Winter had come, and before them lay a white hell, thousands of kilometers long, endless, covered in snow. The real test was just beginning. The Armenian highlands. This wasn't a battlefield. This was a wide ocean. The snow reached waist-high, making every step an ordeal. The Greeks were accustomed to the warm breezes of the Aegean. They didn't know this cold. Their lungs burned when they breathed, and the moisture in their beards instantly turned to ice. Then a strange disease began. Soldiers suddenly went blind. Snow blindness. The endless brightness of the white burned their eyes. They found a cure by tying black cloths around their eyes. A whole army marched by touch. The north wind blew like a knife. It scorched their skin and froze their blood. Some soldiers' toes rotted and fell off inside their sandals. The most dangerous moment was when exhaustion set in. A soldier would sit down on the snow and say, "I'll just rest a little." The warmth that came at that moment was the kiss of death. Those who slept never woke up again. Xenophon ran around like a madman. He shook the freezing soldiers, chopped wood, and forced them to their feet. "Move," he shouted. "If you move, you'll live." When night fell, they huddled together, forming small islands of human warmth. That deadly silence on the snow, under the stars. Only the chattering of teeth could be heard. After days of white torture, the vanguard saw something strange. Chimneys were smoking in the middle of the ground, but there were no houses. These were underground villages. Their entrances were like wells, but they widened downwards. A civilization buried beneath the earth to conserve heat. When the soldiers descended the stairs, it was like entering paradise. It was warm inside. People, cows, goats, and chickens lived under the same roof, underground. The breath of the animals warmed the room. The villagers offered them large bowls. In them was a frothy liquid with barley grains floating in it. Barley wine. That is, beer. There were straws in the bowls. For the first time in history, people were drinking beer with straws. That bitter, dark liquid warmed their frozen veins. That night, for the first time in months, the soldiers took off their armor. They lay down on the dry straw, accompanied by the murmurs of the animals. Outside, the storm howled. But underground, in the orange light of the fire, there was only peace. White Death was waiting at the door, but it would not be able to enter tonight. Xenophon sat by the fire with the village elder. They did not speak the language, but they knew how to smile. The war was not over. The journey was not over. But at least, they were warm. Winter finally gave up. The snow melted, the plateaus turned green. The army emerged from their underground shelters and continued their march. They were no longer the gleaming, armored army that had set out from Babylon. They were weakened. They were wounded. Their clothes were rags. But their spirit was harder than iron. One morning, the guides pointed to a massive mountain ahead. "Mount Thex," they said. "You must climb to its summit." Xenophon, as usual, was guarding the rear guard. Suddenly, he heard a great noise from the front ranks. A roar. Xenophon urged his horse forward. His heart pounded. Another attack, he thought. Have we been ambushed here, at the end of the road? But as he approached, the sound changed. It wasn't a cry of anguish. It was a rhythmic shout from thousands of throats simultaneously. He tried to pick out the word. "Thalata, Thalata, Thalata, Thalata." In Greek, see. See, when Xenophon reached the summit, he was breathless. Below, where the mountains ended, stretched that immense blue. The Black Sea, the Pontus Euxine. For a Greek, the sea is not just water. The sea is home. The sea is the end of the road. It is civilization. At that moment, men hardened by war, who hadn't cried for months, burst into tears like children. Generals embraced their soldiers, soldiers their horses. Persian arrows hadn't killed them. The Karduk rocks hadn't crushed them. The Armenian winter hadn't frozen them. They had succeeded. Without an order, everyone began to gather stones from the ground. On that hill, in honor of that moment, they built a colossal monument, a pile of stones. They left their canes, their shattered shields, which they no longer needed, on those stones. This was a thank you to the gods. Xenophon looked at the sea. They had come all the way here, to the ends of the earth, from the dusty plains of Babylon. This was a story of willpower, not defeat. And history never forgot this march. The return of the 10,000 was etched in memory as the moment the impossible was achieved. The sound of the waves mingled with the howling of the wind. Peace had finally arrived.